It's unthinkable that someone could lose insane amounts of money within a decade or less, but it happens to more lottery winners than you'd think. This led to the coining of the term the lottery curse, where someone would win big only to lose everything in almost a split second. But is it really the lottery curse or just dumb decisions? Hi, my name's Nathan, and welcome to Money Matters. Today we'll be looking at 11 lottery winners and the dumb ways they ended up losing everything. Number 11. Alex Toth. Alex is the only one on this list who managed to keep his winning for more than a decade, but that's only because he opted for installments of over 20 years, instead of the lump sum amount. That decision was perhaps the only smart financial one he made after his win. In 1990, just before Alex won, he and his wife Rhoda had less than $25 to their name and 6 kids to raise. So when they received the news that they were instant millionaires with $10 million, it's safe to say that their lives changed drastically. Despite stating that the money wouldn't change them, the couple turned into prima donnas with big egos almost instantly. They started their spending spree in Las Vegas, where they stayed in a hotel with their kids, costing them $1,000 per night for 3 whole months. The couple also gambled away large sums of money and spent lavishly on trips and shopping sprees. After the initial high of becoming rich faded, they moved back to Florida, bought a property, and settled down with the kids. That, however, did not mean that they had stopped spending their money poorly on expensive items and bad business ventures. Toth and his family eventually had to file for bankruptcy twice in the years that followed. By that time, the IRS had also filed a case against Alex and Rhoda, suspecting that they had been filing false tax returns. The two pleaded guilty, and their case was still ongoing in 2008, when Alex Toth passed away, age 60 years old, due to a heart attack. Rhoda Toth was left to face the charges alone and was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. By this time, they were already back to being penniless, living in worse than okay conditions. Number 10. Michael Carroll. When it comes to stories of lottery winners who lost it all, Michael Carroll is the name that never misses the list. Having won £9.7 million in 2002, Michael was only 19 years old and barely mature enough to know how to handle the money. He spent his money on a big mansion, expensive gold jewelry, hookers, large amounts of drugs, and extravagant parties. He was even reported to hold demolition derbies in his backyard every so often. To top it off, Michael was already at odds with the law even before his win. At a very tender age, he had already garnered a long list of petty crimes and drug use. He even wore a court-ordered ankle bracelet on the day he received his check. So it should come as no surprise that even after his win, he hadn't stopped his habit of breaking the law. He was in and out of jail often for one misdemeanor or another. 10 years down the line, he had managed to blow through all of his wealth. He was homeless and back to living on unemployment checks. Eventually, he managed to get a job at a cookie factory, earning $300 per week. Recently, he got a job at a slaughterhouse where he earns slightly more per week by about $200. In an interview, he mentions that although he doesn't regret his decisions, his life is much better now than when he was rich. Now he's clean, out of jail, and able to be a part of his daughter's life. Number 9. Sharon Tirabassi. By the time luck favored Sharon Tirabassi and gave her $10.5 million in lottery winnings, she was a single mother of 6, just getting out of the welfare roll. For Sharon, her childhood was spent moving from one shelter to another. She never had a lot to go by, so you can imagine that she had no idea how to handle her newfound fortune wisely. Like most lottery winners, Sharon went about spending her money aimlessly on expensive luxuries. She splurged on lavish trips for her family, and friends to places like Cancun, the Caribbean, Florida, and California. She also spent a large sum on designer clothes, a big house, and 4 luxury cars, including her favorite customized Cadillac Escalade that cost her $200,000. But all this reckless spending wasn't the only thing that sucked up all Sharon's wealth. Being a generous person and raised to always help those around her, Tirabassi had a hard time saying no to estranged family and friends who came out of nowhere wanting handouts or loans. First, she gave her parents $1 million and shared $1.75 million among her 4 siblings. She also bought houses in the city and rented them out at low rates to low-income families in the city. A noble gesture, but not a smart financial investment. Other than that, she would also give out loans to many of her friends, whether it was to bail out her friend's husband out of jail or starting a business venture. Needless to say, those loans were never repaid, and the friends were never to be seen again. Having wasted most of her fortune, mostly on her family and friends, Sharon one day woke up to $750,000 in her account. Her house and 3 cars were gone. The remaining Cadillac was broken down with no money to fix it. And just like that, 9 years down the line, Sharon Tirabassi was back to riding the bus to her job as a personal care worker, so she could raise enough money to pay the rent and put food on the table. She was smart enough to put the rest of her winning in a trust fund for her kids to access at the age of 26 years old. Number 8. James Hayes. In 9 years, Hayes moved from being a straight guy working as a guard to a lucky millionaire worth $19 million, and later a heroin-addicted bank robber. Quite a transition, wouldn't you say? In 1998, James Hayes' luck changed when he became the lucky winner of California's lottery jackpot. While receiving his check, he stated that the money would only change him for the better. The money did change him, but not for the better. He was smart enough to opt for the annual installments, but that was as smart as he got. From there, he splurged his money on numerous sports cars, lavish trips, parties, and several beachfront houses. He also wasted some of it on bad business ventures that weren't well thought out, as well as giving handouts to friends and family who came out of nowhere. When he got divorced from his wife, who believed that he was spending more than he had, Hayes was forced to give half of his installments to her as alimony. That was when he cashed out the rest of his winning in a lump sum amount of $6 million. Around the same time, he developed health problems that required him to pay out of pocket since he had no medical plan. His health problems led him to develop an addiction to painkillers, and later led him to becoming a heroin addict. Soon enough, he was spending $1,000 on heroin per week. Of course, he couldn't keep up this lifestyle for long, and by 2007, he was completely broke. Feeling like he had no other choice left, he resorted to a life of crime and began robbing banks. He managed to rob 11 banks for a total of $40,000 before the FBI managed to arrest him. Pleading guilty, Hayes was served with 3 years in prison and was meant to be released in 2020. Number 7. Janet Leigh. For Janet Leigh, her biggest undoing was her generous heart, and perhaps her gambling problem. In 1993, Leigh won $18 million from the Illinois lottery and was ecstatic when receiving her check. Unfortunately, she didn't keep her wealth for too long. It was reported that she had a gambling habit that cost her $300,000 per year, but that wasn't really what ate up most of her fortune. Although her intentions were pure, Janet Leigh ended up giving more to charity than she could afford. She donated sizable sums of money to social, political, and educational purposes. Part of her donations included the $1 million she gave to Washington University to build a new library. By 2001, all her fortunes were gone. In 8 years since her win, she was forced to file for bankruptcy. By that time, she only had $700 in the bank and was $2.5 million in debt. Number 6. William Bud Post III. Before William Post won $16.2 million, he had $2.46, was living on disability checks, and had to pawn a ring for $40 to buy the lucky winning lottery ticket. He opted to receive his winning in 26 annual installments, but began spending it recklessly right off the bat. Within 2 weeks of receiving the first installment, he had already blown through $300,000. He acquired a liquor license, and despite not having a pilot's license, he bought a twin-engine plane. Aside from that, he leased a restaurant in Florida for his brother and sister, and a used car lot, along with its fleet, for his other brother. He was already in debt of $500,000 within 3 months. 1 year later, it was reported that one of his brothers had hired an assassin to try to kill Post, which led him to be estranged from his family. He later bought a rundown mansion worth $400,000 to upgrade it and got married about 6 times. In 1992, the court ordered him to give his landlady a third of his win. She claimed that they had an agreement to share the winnings since she was the one helping him buy the tickets. Post, however, refused to comply with the court and resulted in his annual payments being frozen until the matter was resolved. In 1996, he sold off his crumbling 16-bedroom mansion for $65,000, less than half of what he bought it for, and auctioned his remaining lottery installments. This gave him about $2.56 million, which mostly went to pay his debts. The rest was squandered on 2 homes, a truck, 2 cars, 2 62-inch TVs, 2 motorcycles, and a sailboat with which he planned to start a fishing business. But by 1998, he was arrested on the same boat because he refused to serve his sentence on an assault that happened 6 years prior. He had opened fire on a man coming to his home to collect his car repair debt. By the time he had served his sentence, Post was back to living off disability checks. He died in January 2006 of respiratory failure, leaving behind his 7th wife and 9 children from his second marriage. Number 5. Gerald Muswagon. Winning a jackpot of $10 million was more than Gerald Muswagon knew how to handle. This is why in the first 2 years after winning, Muswagon splurged on family and friends, buying them expensive cars and electronics. Within 24 hours, he had bought 8 of his friends a flat-screen TV each. He also bought himself a big mansion that he turned into a legendary party pad, every night where he consumed insane amounts of alcohol and drugs. After 2 years, he tried doing something sensible with his remaining money and started a logging business called Gerald's Logging. Unfortunately, the business closed down not too long after, owing to low sales and the fact that perhaps Gerald lacked the business sense to keep it afloat. With a failed business, Gerald went back to his excessive partying, along with alcohol and other drug use. One night in 2000, after his parties, he ended up in a police chase for driving at 180 kilometers per hour, and he was given 3 months in jail. But it wasn't Gerald's first time breaking the law. Before his win, he already had quite the police record for an offense like robbery and drunk driving. So it wasn't long until he was back in prison again. In 2002, he was accused of sexually assaulting a 19-year-old girl that he had hired to help clean his house shortly after his wife died. He was convicted for the crime in 2005 and given another 3 months in jail. By the time he was out, Gerald was completely broke and forced to work at a friend's farm for minimum wage so he could provide for his 6 kids and girlfriend. Perhaps unable to cope with his new reality, Gerald ended up taking his life later that year by hanging himself in his mother's garage. Number 4. Keith Gough. While it took Muswagon 7 years to blow through his fortune, it took Keith Gough 5 years to squander his £9 million, which is equivalent to about $11 million. According to Keith, his life was stable before his win. He worked as a baker and was in a loving marriage with his wife, who was a secretary. The couple were, however, still ecstatic about their win and went about spending it on luxury items like exotic cars and racehorses. Gough also had a bit of a gambling problem. He also rented an executive box in Aston Villa Club for £350,000. Soon he resigned from his job and developed a drinking habit out of boredom. His addiction would later lead to his divorce from his wife. After the divorce, Keith moved into a rented mansion worth $1 million with a chauffeur and gardener that he paid between £15,000 and £25,000. He eventually got a wake-up call and decided to check into a rehab facility, where he met James Prince, a fraudster who conned him out of £700,000. That, coupled with worse financial decisions, led Keith to live in a spare room in his nephew's apartment in Shropshire, regretting ever winning the lottery. He eventually died at the early age of 58 due to a heart attack, likely caused by heavy drinking, stress, and depression from losing everything. Number 3. David Lee Edwards. Making it to our top 3 is the ex-con from Kentucky, David Lee Edwards, who managed to use up his $27 million lottery prize money in 5 years, despite having hired a financial advisor. Starting with, David had the right mindset. He wanted to make his money last for him, his wife, and his daughter. But somewhere along the way, the money must have gotten to his head. In just 3 months of winning, he was reported to have already used $3 million. He bought a mansion worth $1.6 million, a jet that came with a private pilot worth $600,000, and a fleet of expensive cars. By the end of the year, he had already spent $12 million. He even sold off the bonds and shares his financial advisor invested in on their behalf. He tried investing in a fiber optics and a limo business, but ended up losing money instead of gaining profits. With his bad financial choices, coupled with the drug addiction he developed, Edwards ended up broke after 5 years. His wife divorced him soon after, and he ended up dying 12 years later, alone and penniless. Number 2. Billie Harrel Jr. Second place goes to Billie Harrel Jr. for spending his fortune in only 2 short years. In 1997, Harrel was a husband and a father of 3, jumping from one low-paying job to another to support his family. So winning the jackpot of $31 million from the Texas Lotto seemed like a God-sent miracle. That's why among the other things Harrel did with the money from his first installment was donate heavily to their church. He also donated 480 turkeys to the poor and spent a sizable amount buying expensive cars and houses for family and friends. Billy also spent lavishly on himself, his wife, and his kids. They splurged on a luxurious life, filled with costly trips to places like Hawaii. His lavish spending attracted unwanted calls and messages from strangers, who would call demanding a donation. He had to change his number several times. Later, he made a bad deal with a company that pays lump sums to lotto winners in exchange for their annual installments. As a result, he ended up with far less than he was meant to get. His money soon ran out from all the bad decisions, and his marriage also hit the rocks. His wife separated from him less than a year after this incident, and it seemed to be the last straw for Harrel. In May 1999, the night he was scheduled to have dinner with his ex-wife, Harrel's son found him dead in his home. He had committed suicide by killing himself. It seems he was unable to bear how much he had lost. This is based on the fact that he had told his financial advisor that winning the lottery was the worst thing that could have ever happened to him a few days before dying. Number 1. Denise Rossi. At the top of the list of dumbest winners, Denise Rossi takes the prize for being the dumbest winner. Having won a share of $1.3 million from a lottery pool that they had at work at the end of 1996, Denise was determined that her husband shouldn't get any of the money. She even wrote down her mother's address, where her annual installments, and any communication from the California Lotto could be sent. Later, she would argue that it was because she was afraid that he would have forced her to give him all the money, which he would have wasted, owing to his gambling and money mismanagement history. So instead of coming clean, Rossi instead presented her husband with divorce papers just 11 days after her win. The husband, who thought their marriage had been a happy one, was shocked by the sudden divorce, but did not push for any answers. 2 years after the divorce, having been forced to file for bankruptcy, the husband came to know about her lottery win through a misdirected mailing. It was a letter addressed to Denise from a company that paid lump sums to lottery winners, wanting to know if she was interested in the same. Although the husband was originally entitled to only half of the amount, he ended up suing her for the entire win based on the fact that she had hid it from him during the divorce settlement. Although Denise tried hard to convince the court that she was the one entitled to the money, the judge ruled in her ex-husband's favor. In an attempt to avoid giving half of her fortune to her husband, Denise Rossi ended up losing everything to him. Who do you think is the dumbest winner on this list? Or who do you think doesn't deserve to be on it? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching.